first mover advantage is always a thing, right? Sometimes it's an expensive lesson, like with
School fees.
fees.
Let's just plug that in. That's what you call school fees.
like with your, I suppose, like Yahoo, Google, numerous.
Sony Ericsson with
or-
Apple.
Or what's the Amazon and what was the other one before?
eBay.
Right? So, yeah, it's definitely a thing, right? So I was gonna touch on your point about if enough people care about something, right? Companies are kind of forced to I guess confront it. What about carbon emissions? So I have I've been watching a lot of car videos, and like a lot of journalists don't like the fact that the cars are not as loud or as aggressive, right? And the primary reason for that is because they sort of like every car manufacturer is moving towards a more electric, like your Teslas, right, and that's to obviously reduce carbon emissions and to try and make the planet more sustainable and all of that, right? So in that case, who do you think was the one, or who was responsible for that? Was it the users, or was it like a board that kind of controlled this? And the reason I mentioned this, right, is in society, it then let's not go theoretical, and but who does the onus lie with? Is it like us everyday people, or is it like the people that currently control the assets and basically move and make the decisions and
I wouldn't say who the power lies with, because I think that there's two parties. Well, in the capitalist society that we operate in, there's two parties in any transaction. There's the supply side and the demand side. And we're obviously exchanging, you're exchanging your money or your time in the case of you being on social media, whatever it is that you're exchanging in exchange for whatever product which they give you. So I would say, it's the only time I would say where one can say that the one side has more power is when, let's say, you're in a situation where there's a monopoly or an oligopoly. Sure. For those who don't know, a monopoly, for doesn't know, a monopoly is any market. And when I say market, I'm not talking about like a place where you go buy like chicken and fish, like any sector where there is only one supplier.
In every case, it's Eskom.
For example, Eskom in the electricity or power generating sector, they are a monopoly. There are probably other electricity providers. If I doubt there are, and if they are, they're probably
stand to be corrected.
small.
But in South Africa, I don't think you can. I think legislation in South Africa almost makes it to a point where Eskom is a monopoly.
Well, how do I put it? They, in the terms of probably like that power station, but there are other means of generating electricity, solar, nuclear, biomass, whatever. But I don't think they're obviously not on the scale of Eskom. Like when you buy a house, you're not thinking, okay, maybe solar's obviously a bit bigger now, but generally when you build a house, you're not thinking, okay, I think, I have Eskom and then I have this biomass company. I think I'm going to go with the biomass company because they aren't big enough. So that's probably a good example of a monopoly. Then there's other places where there's, you could say, an oligopoly. Let's look at
Oil.
Cell phone providers, or like our telecommunication providers, MTN, Vodacom, Cell C, Telkom. There's Rain, but I wouldn't say they're on the scale of MTN and them. I'm trying to think who else.
No, but I think that the telecommunication company is tricky because like people are for them, people are trying for them not to be oligopolies, right? Because they've had massive lawsuits against them for price fixing. So I think in this specific case, to make an example, I think OPEC would be the best case scenario because they actually collude to fix the price of oil. Like they actually work in unison. Where except for like last year, where one guy went rogue and the others had to follow suit. But like that's like because the Celsi case, for example, Celsi now is in like bad financial
Haven't they always
environment.
been though?
Huh?
Haven't they always been?
They've always been like the little kid.
Yeah.
The little kid in the
Yeah.
But maybe just explain to everyone listening what exactly an oligopoly. So that's an example. OPEC is an example of an oligopoly. Maybe just explain to them quickly what an oligopoly is. You kind of alluded to it.
So an oligopoly it's a market that has a few powerhouses, right? At times it can be an example of Celsius and Telkom, where it's just by design. It wasn't something that they manufactured, but it can also be something that is manufactured. For example, OPEC, where it's the countries that produce oil, right? And the reason that they do that, they do it this way, is because they realize that they're going to lose money if they compete on price. So then they decided that they need to fix the price so that no matter where you are, the price of oil is still the same. And so they then compete on volume and not necessarily price. So it's about, if you want to make more money, you need to produce the most amount of oil. So quantity and not necessarily price, because price, they can easily price themselves out of anything, right? Because price wars don't end in, what you call this?
It's great for consumers though, but bottom
Right?
line for business.
Yeah, for business. So that's what they realize that. So that's essentially an oligopoly. So yeah.
Yeah, and so we have those two situations. I think in those cases, and I think clearly from the examples, it's clear that the power in those cases definitely lies with the providers, which would be probably the executives, the decision makers in those companies. As a consumer, you don't have much power. But I think that's why cases like, or not cases, things like the competitions commissions.
Sure.
We saw that all those fights, well, he's out of office now, but Donald Trump's having like with Amazon, wanting to stop them from going into too many sectors to prevent them from
In America, they've got an antitrust. I'm not sure if they have it in specific South Africa, but in America, they've got an antitrust law that started during the J.K. Rockefeller stages when and Carnegie, when those guys were consolidating, like basically
all the banks
and everything. And then Americans started being like, no, man, there's going to be a point where these guys are just doing too much. So
and so in things like that is critical because it prevents these, or tries to minimize anyways, the powers of these oligopolies and monopolies. Because the more options you have, the consumers have, the more the power
dynamics,
more the power dynamics balance. And then that's when now the market forces of supply and demand have a much bigger effect. And now it's like, okay, us as consumers, we're not willing to spend, 35 Rand for a loaf of bread. So if this person's offering 20 Rand, you're charging 35 Rand, we're all going to go 20 Rand. You have no choice but to go down. And it's the same thing going back to our farming example where if you look at that case, consumers are like, we don't want to spend that much money on food that's farmed unethically. So we will be willing to pay the premium for this ethically sourced food. And if you're not going to do it farming that way, then we will not buy. And that eats directly into revenue. I like the carbon emissions thing that you brought up. I think with them, I don't know how much of it is consumer based. I'll be honest with the cars. Because I'll be honest, right? Like me, myself, I don't know about y'all, many, like I said, car journalists, they want those engines which, it sounds like you're on the back of a wild beast. And it's, I want a Lambo one day that spits fire and all that type of stuff. I think that's probably more regulation from regulatory bodies trying to get companies to be more carbon emission conscious as opposed to as purely the effects of supply and demand. And I think that ties into what Tulani said, where we don't have a fully capitalist societies. It's semi, because if it were fully capitalist, I'm quite confident there really wouldn't be that many electric cars being sold. But because governments are stepping in to regulate it, we're now having situations where it's having to come to fruition because of that regulation.
Like for me, like that whole carbon emission type of thing, right? So I think it's the reason Tesla's still around, right? In a sense where, like, there's a future marketplace for Tesla, where, as he said, regulators, especially in Europe, like his biggest market is Europe and China, right? The reason China is so big is because China, when there was still quite a manufacturing economy, it was really bad. I can't find the actual terminology to state like the climate, right? They were polluting the climate quite badly. And then the government then decided that we need to do something about this, right? Because we're one of the biggest polluters. And weirdly enough, that China's weird. They're the biggest oil consumer and at the same time one of the biggest EV consumers, right? And Europe is actually one of the biggest. So it's China and Europe, right? And that's because Europe have always been forward-looking in terms of climate. But it makes sense for Europe if you look at it's a very dark area, right? It's like it's cloudy and rain. So for them, like electricity is like a very big thing.
And they don't have an abundance of land. I think we're kind of spoiled here in Africa, as much as like you can argue over who the ownership should be with. I think that probably a conversation for another day. But we can't deny the fact that we have an abundance of land. And I think because of that, we do have a proclivity to be rather wasteful when it comes to it. Whereas in Europe, because interesting thing, do you know like Germany is the size of the Northern Cape
I don't know that.
province?
Definitely don't.
It is the size, and you think, oh, Germany is like this massive. You think it's like twice the size of South Africa. Germany is the size of the Northern Cape. So think about how big Germany. When you think of it, it's so big, the size of that one province here, and like how now they have to in those European countries. You have to be efficient because I mean, you know, you're not gonna get more land unless you pull a Dubai and build this.
Like
Expand your coast.
But then some of them don't even have a coastal line that's big enough, and it will be too expensive. Like Dubai, when Dubai had decided to basically put land into the coastal lines, they had money to do that. Like in Germany, they're not an oil-rich country that can afford to spend billions on a damn mall or hotel. Like,
I suppose with Dubai, they had to find a way to kind of keep the money within, circulation, as opposed to like your Germany with manufacturing and them being solid. Because they, I think, a net positive. They've always been well, for the longest time.
But weird enough, like Dubai, okay, let's not say Dubai, like the UAE, which is all the Emirates countries, they have so much money that the moment they realize they've done, they then had to find other investments, which is what resulted in them investing in like teams like Manchester City, PSGs. That wasn't because they love football. It wasn't because they love football. It was because of like, okay, we have this excess amount of money, and it doesn't make sense for us to sit in a bank account and us buying lions and tigers. We need to turn this into actual assets. For example, if you look at Manchester City, like literally everything that you see in Manchester City,
Etihad.
yeah, it's literally owned by like every branding that you see by them is even PSG. The only thing would be in Jordan, right? But then that's a result of Nike sponsoring them. But like everything that is consumed by them, like is actually these guys. So, but anyway, I want to make a point of like I think with the car situation, right? If there's, I think that's somehow like capitalism, right? If there's a willing buyer, so like if there's a willing buyer to buy a car that's going to be loud, that means that there will be a willing seller. So there will be a Ferrari who's willing to actually create that car and pay and simply shift the price, because the legislations charge you an additional tax if you go over the emission that it's required. But if I can shift the price, or if I can shift the cost of it to the user, and the consumer is willing to pay that amount, I'll simply sell it, right? So it goes back to this point where, like, I still think that money changed the world and not opinions. Like,
Well, absolutely. Well, to some degree, right? For instance, if you think about Tesla back in the days, right? The first couple of users, those cars were super expensive, right? And they didn't work as well as they had
as
imagined.
advertised.
And I think it took like twice as long as it was supposed to manufacture the whole thing, and you basically needed to be a patient.
Took like a year. It took like a year.
No, I think it took even more than that. It was supposed to take like let's say a year, but then I think it took like 3 or 4 years. And every time they like produced something, it was terrible, or something, the battery was not strong enough, or so you're absolutely right in the sense that you absolutely need those willing buyers. and unfortunately, capitalism still.
like it's weird on Tesla case. Tesla is actually like in terms of like a market value, the highest car maker. But do you know that for them, their peak in terms of like car produced is 500,000 cars in a year. For them, like I recently read this article, for them, that's something that was like massive. And BMW probably produced
10 million.
like millions and millions of them, right? Which goes back to the point where he found a niche marketplace where there were people who felt that the product was worthy for them to wait for it. Like there were cases where people waited 5 years to get the car. Like the guy is a dreamer, right? So he tells you that he wants something, and then he puts a thought out in public, and then he tells you that he wants to create a specific item, right? And then there's willing people who put in money, who literally to order, like, yeah, here's some 10,000 USD. And then he simply just builds on that. So unfortunately, like no matter how woke I'd say I'd want to be in terms of like my purchases and all that stuff, a Ferrari, if there's a person who's willing to buy a Ferrari that's very loud, right? They will make a Ferrari that is very loud, right? But like I wanna, because like for example we're talking about like how we got here. So in terms of like another thing that I'd like Kasfar to achieve in this specific podcast, it would be in South Africa specifically, and I think the world is probably also going this way now by the max exodus of jobs, right? There's this idea of glorified entrepreneurship.
Okay.
There's this idea of like, yeah, I can control my time, be your own boss. It sounds really beautiful on the exterior, right? But like, and that's because all we see on social media is entrepreneurs glorifying their lives and posting cars.
But we don't see the ones that failed.
And that's for me what I'd like for us to also achieve in the specific platform. Not necessarily people that failed, but for people to have an understanding that if you have an entrepreneur here, or if you have someone who's building a business, to understand the quote unquote growing pains / school fees for the kid in grade 10 who's not sure if he should get an education or should pursue entrepreneurship, for him to understand that it's not as easy as he thinks. And the weird thing is that, like, for example, Elon, right, in Tesla, it's just that he's been public. Like Jeff Bezos, Amazon started in like late 90s. Yeah. He started when everything was crashing in terms of tech, but I think he blew up probably in the last 3 to 4 years where we got to knowledge of him. But that time period where he was making losses,
10 years, bro.
We don't know. The same thing as actually Netflix. Like Netflix probably became popular in South Africa in the last 3 or 4 years.
They've been around.
But they've been around. Remember, we listened to Business Wars, like the podcast. Like they've been around and they were losing money. Obviously, their term of losing money, they still take in like millions. But like they were losing money in that process, right? But like now it's easy for you to see like the guy who's made it and assume that it was a quick fix.
Can I add on something which I think would be important for us to discuss? Just going forward, obviously, it will be pervasive throughout the different discussions we have. That there is a difference. So I'm sure probably everyone here has read Rich Dad Poor Dad. Sure. The whole passive income, financial freedom.
Can I be honest with you?
What?
I never read it. I tried.
You tried. It was too story fluffy for you, or?
Yeah, it was.
But then it also depends on when you tried, right?
I don't think if you read it now,
like I haven't tried. Like I remember, like in varsity, like even in high school, right? Like I've always been relatively action based, right? And for me, it just seemed too perfect. And by then, I had like an interest in like finance and all this stuff, and I just felt as if his idea of everything, he's telling you all about the great parts because I've like read synopsis of it, of what it is, or even listened to his interviews where it's just like, yeah, that's how you can grow your money, just go into property. But like no one tells you that like when you go into property, you can buy a house that you want to rent out and not have a tenant for a year.
Timing is a massive thing. Well, that's true. But I'm saying like timing is also a thing because maybe back then the number of available properties was not as much, right? So when he wrote the book, right, although I think how he made his wealth is also another questionable thing, where he told you about like property, but he made most of his money from the book.
Yeah. And
but
then
anyway.
went into property.
Yeah, but like timing is a very important thing, right? For instance, even like with machine learning and AI, right? I think if you had the conversation 10 years before, right, about like it being a reality in everyday like IoT devices, sensors at home, image recognition, object detection, that being a reality is now like accessible, right? Accessible. Whereas in prior to this, it could have not have been, right? It could have just been an idea or in a dream, right? And today, because people have backed it up financially with capital, companies exist, right? Now it's more accessible for us to even consume that idea, right? So timing plays a massive role in the ideas at the time, I guess. Yeah.
And yeah, to go back to the Rich Dad Poor Dad thing. So obviously, one of the big concepts he touches on is this concept of financial freedom. And I think if we're being brutally honest, like maybe we can even shoot a documentary one day or something. If you speak to enough people, I don't know how many people actually want to be entrepreneurs more than they really just want financial freedom. What they want is some sort of income, which I don't have to constantly be working for, some passive income, and I have time to do other stuff, but I know that my needs are met, and obviously, depending on, how ambitious you are or how frivolous you are with the life you want to live, many people really just want to know, okay, I have enough time to spend with my family and those I love and focus on other things. My basic needs are met. Maybe I have enough to get a decent car, maybe go on holiday every now and again. And some people obviously, comfortable. Some people want, and I think property is maybe obviously a good example. If you can get a lot of good properties, that rental income or the capital appreciation on them, I mean, you could be a big dog. But obviously, you need a lot of capital to get into the property sphere in the first place. But I think what many people really want a lot of the times is financial freedom and not necessarily the journey of entrepreneurship. And I think that throughout the conversations that we have, it could provide a lot of value for us to actually differentiate between the two. Because not everyone wants to work 18 hours a day or 15 hours a day.
Sure.
I was about to say that I think the term financial freedom is a fluffy getaway card for not wanting to actually work, because there's an opportunity cost to everything, right? If you want to be a millionaire, so for example, it's just using Elon Musk here. Like Elon Musk works 15-hour days and has had like 3 divorces. Are you willing to go through that as a person to want to live the life that he lives, right? So when you say we want to be financially free, like what does that mean? Like what does that mean? Because I could argue that to be financially free, I could be in a township living in a shack and making sure I just eat. I don't have any debt. I don't have anything. I eat, I sleep, I move on with my life. I could argue that's essentially financially free because that person isn't worried about money pains, if I can call it that.
Could I challenge that? I think so when we talking about the concept of financial freedom, obviously the financial aspect's fine. I think let's focus on the concept of freedom. Right now, when we talk about freedom, essentially there is nothing restricting you from being able to access or do something. It's like you aren't free to access certain properties because obviously, it's private property. So I think oftentimes when people talk about financial freedom, it's that obviously it's relative. It's not, I can't put a particular number on it, but it boils down to your finances don't restrict you from doing what you want to do. So be that if your goal is to have, a 2-bed house or 3-bed house, send your kids to a decent school, be able to go on holiday, I could say you've achieved financial freedom as long as that is where you want to be. But if your goal is, you want to be driving big cars and own yachts and, go live it up in Ibiza every month and stuff.
Sure. Regular South Africans just say Ibiza, but sure.
Ibiza.
But sure, Spanish. but sure, boy.
I get what you're saying, but it's personal, right? Right?
Yeah, it's personal. And if that's where you want, if that's the type of freedom you want to enjoy and financially you aren't able to do that, then one could say you don't have financial freedom. I definitely get where you're coming at, that the idea that a life like that is possible kind of does seem like a cop out for people to not want to do the hard
Put in the
work.
hours.
But, and maybe this is where social media comes in, I don't think we can pretend as if there aren't people who in a way are living that. Now, how they got there, be it through in...
Wait, before you continue. If we're adding social media to it, right? Like, I think we can't use that. For example, there are some people our age, right? And I don't mean this in a negative way, who wake up at 10, go to gym, popping bottles.
Do you know them?
I've seen them. But me as Tulani, I could like crave that, right? Wake up and craving that. But I don't understand the family context in which they live in.
I was about to say that, is that people can post that on social media. We don't know the journey or the backstory. They could come from a very rich family. They could have won the lotto. They could have, but I look at, and that's the thing, like there's a dude who we follow on social media, Jose Zuniga. I think you would kind of look at his life and say, oh no, this guy has so much free time and stuff. That man works. The man, the man grinds like weekends, the whole thing. And I guess again it goes that thing of like there's so many parts which you don't see, and we'll see him doing a vlog of him going to buy, seeing what's the best suit I can buy, but you don't see.
But then he's a YouTuber; it's technically part of his job.
Yeah, you don't see the other 12 hours he spent organizing those trips, busy, scripting the video, speaking to sponsors, dealing with these other brands and stuff.
Look. I think if anything we can agree on for this podcast, we'd like to at least show or bring some light to the behind the scenes. Like the things that people really go through to get to where they need to be.
Yeah.
Be it for their business or for their freedom, whatever that may be for them, right? And I think it's very important to, you touched on social media, but like to effectively reveal reality.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's such a disconnect between, there's such a disconnect between
okay
what
to
we
say fire
think
stuff.
is and what reality is.
Yeah.
Right? And how painful, I suppose, the transition could be from where you are to where you want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, do you guys have like closing remarks with regards to because we've already spoken about like the goals and what you achieve, like what closing remarks do you guys have?
I'd say one thing I want to put out, like, to everyone in our audience and obviously to us, is that, at the end of the day, this was a journey that we're on and we'd like everyone to join us on. We're not claiming to be experts or gurus. There are obviously going to be a lot of things we get wrong, and hopefully we get more things right than what we get wrong. But tying in with the name school fees, this is part of an educational journey for us as well. So like, just everyone listening, I hope you enjoy this journey with us, and let's grow together and let's make the most of it. I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to provide a lot of value to the listeners and to us as well. And to me, that's my closing remarks. Please like and subscribe and leave comments and share it with your like exes and stuff. And
exes deserve money too. Anyway,
No, man, I'm just super excited. I think any journey should be enjoyed and we should learn. I'm trying to paraphrase the Alchemist, and it's effectively through the journey that you learn and you become who you need to become to overcome what you need to overcome. So
there was a lot coming there, sir.
Okay, sure. I'll hand over to you.
Anyway, guys, thank you for listening. We'll tag our, if you guys have anything to say to us, if we've got anything wrong, we'll tag our social media platforms on the descriptions. And as Daryl said, like, subscribe, send to your ex, send to the person that you wish achieve something in their lives. And we thank you for listening. We are the School Fees episode. I'm Tulani. That guy over there, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see him. That's Daryl. And then this is Ludwe. And bye everyone.
Bye.